VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at VCYAmerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Morris, and good to have you with us on Crosstalk today. A word of greeting to our friends nationally and internationally now with over 44 countries, people listening to Crosstalk, and 40 of the 50 states also indicated that are picking up our stream or whatever. Today, actually, on 95 stations, live broadcasting as well, and we're very grateful for every one of those stations. And if you're in the listening area of your station, take a moment, and thank your station management for carrying the program. This may be shocking, but VCY America and Crosstalk does not purchase airtime from any radio station whatsoever, but they carry it because they feel it is vital information that needs to come to you. And so as you support your stations across the country, remember to give and support them and to let the management know that you appreciate it. We are honored and privileged to be able to do this. Right now, before we get into our topic and our guest, actually, this breaks the topic because from Open Doors, a news clip that just came to my computer at 8:48 this morning. It says, North Korean church leaders are asking for prayer amid war preparations. Underground Christians report ratcheting up of combat readiness. And prayer for the beleaguered believers in North Korea is more important than ever, said the Open Doors organization. According to the Underground Christians, there is a warlike atmosphere in the country. We are to meet the decisive battle with a gun in one hand and a hammer in the other, summarized a Christian leader about the message of the North Korean people recently received from the High Command. Now, the military, Army, Navy, Air Force, and troops, strategic rocket troops, and the Red Guards and the Red Youth Guards are already in combat mode. Urgent meetings are being held everywhere, regardless if it is day or night. All these meetings, officials making decisions on what needs to happen in case war breaks out, and everyone, including women, need to be combat ready. Now, this coming again from within the church in North Korea. Now, we are aware, of course, that this is not just an item from Open Doors, but this is national news. And today, it's a privilege to have with us Mr. Michael Meloff, as he's a staff writer for WorldNet Daily and the G2 Bulletin. He is a former senior security policy analyst in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. He has almost 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Department of Defense and is a specialized trainer of border guards and special forces. He is the author of the book, A Nation Forsaken, EMP, the Escalating Threat of an American Catastrophe. We are very glad to have Michael with us. Michael, welcome to Crosstalk.
Thanks for having me.
Michael, as I've read that news clip, tensions are heating up between North Korea and the U.S. In a nutshell, what's provoked this escalation of this threat level?
Well, a number of factors, and I think ultimately there may have been a miscalculation on the part of our own intelligence service as to what the reaction would be. But number one was the UN sanctions that were voted on earlier to impose sanctions on North Korea for its missile and its nuclear testing. Since it's a member of the UN, they're obliged to abide by the UN, and they had said no, and then they went ahead and did it anyway. Secondly, you have a new leadership there that is brand new and untested, and wants to show prominence and leadership. And it's a 28-year-old Kim Jong-un, and he really is taking, it appears to be that he's taking more advice from more aggressive elements within the military at this point, and away from the more moderate group that counsels his father. And he's actually made comments to the effect that he wants to be considered stronger than his father in terms of dealing with the United States and South Korea. Thirdly is the annual U.S.-South Korean joint exercises. We had they go on every year, and every year North Korea reacts to it. But this year, it seemed to be an uncharacteristic reaction, bordering on what officials call bellicose rhetoric and threats, certainly threats of a preemptive nuclear strike against the United States, something which has never actually happened before.
Now, yesterday, General James Thurman, commander of the United States forces in Korea, said that the current situation on the Korean Peninsula is unprecedentedly volatile and dangerous.
Yes.
Explain to us more in detail of where things stand at this time.
Well, all forces are on alert, both South Korean and U.S. forces. And Seoul is about 30 miles from the DMZ, and U.S. forces apparently are stuck in between. So if there was any swarming effect by North Korean troops, it would be catastrophic for our men and women who are stationed in that area, because we wouldn't be able to react in time. It would be the swarming. You wouldn't be able to deal with the swarming effect. Pretty much what the Chinese did back in 1950, in October, November 1950, when they came over the Yalu River, and something like 250 to 350,000 troops just swarmed the place. I know for a fact that my uncle happened to be above the Yalu River, which separates north and south, and he was. It took 10 years to get his body back.
Oh my! Well, as we see what is happening, I mean, there have been generations that have grown with very little understanding of the conflict that occurred years ago in Korea.
Sure.
And so when we think of the Korean War, that to some is like ancient history, and Adolf Hitler to the older folk.
Yep.
But the situation here, folks, is serious. Now, it's been reported that North Korea has authorized plans for nuclear strikes on targets in the United States.
Right.
Other reports have indicated specific spots in the U.S.
Right.
What can you tell us on that?
Well, it's pretty much what has been publicized, and that is that certain cities like Washington, D.C., and Austin, Texas, and Los Angeles were singled out as prospective targets. The question is, does he have that capability? And what's worrisome is the fact that following the last underground nuclear weapons test, I believe in February, it was only then that Kim Jong-un announced the possibility of a preemptive nuclear strike against the United States. Then he released like 3 videos that showed nuclear attacks on New York City and Washington. That told me and a few others that I've talked to that he may have established some kind of a breakthrough with respect to miniaturization of a nuclear warhead so that it can fit on the missiles. And it was in December, I believe it was, that he actually conducted a very successful missile test. And that would be the long-range space launch vehicle that we're watching right now. They're stationed in the western portion of the country, but he's moved 1 or 2 now toward the east. And so I think our officials are watching that movement very, very closely to see what he's going to do with that. Now, certainly with that longer range, at least Hawaii, Guam, and Japan would be the primary targets. When he did his December test, he also launched a satellite, and that package could easily be a nuclear weapon in the future, and that kind of a test, even though it was a satellite, is often conducted to test for deorbiting a nuclear weapon out of range, so that in the beyond reach, if you will, so that it can descend. And if it's a nuclear weapon, and this is what then gets into my issue of electromagnetic pulse, there could be a high altitude nuclear explosion, which would then send that electric pulse and pretty much decimate our electrical grid if it's not protected.
And folks, if we understand, and we here at VCY America have been using satellites for years, decades, in fact, whereby we bounce our signal that many of you are listening to a satellite that's 20,300 miles out in space. And that satellite, of course, through technology, is able to be moved. It's in a box of about 40 miles square, in a 40-mile square box. And they operate it, the thrusters and everything, keeping that satellite in position. If we move our dish down here a quarter of an inch, we lose contact with the satellite. So this is precise stuff. But bear in mind, folks, that when a satellite runs out of, when it needs to be disposed of, they will use thrusters that will shove it out of orbit, out into space, and it hopefully will get lost in space somewhere. But if the thrusters were turned the other way, Michael, I think that's what you're talking about.
Yes. Then what we just mentioned is apropos, and then we have a problem, and it can be done on command. It can be deorbited and then exploded at a high altitude. Do they have that technology? Well, if he's bolstering like he is, and the question is it deception or is it for real? And the problem here, and this is where we really have an issue, is that our intelligence on North Korea is very limited. Mm-hmm. We do not know precisely what's going on. We only found out back in 2010 that he even had a full-up nuclear enrichment program, which is allowing him to make fuel for nuclear weapons, and it's all at weapons grade. We didn't even know about it, even though we had inspectors in and out of the Yongbyon station, which was shut down in 2007. And this facility was built right next door. So, and it was only discovered in 2010, and that was only because American academics happened to be given a tour, and they were briefed on it. And this was while relations between North Korea and the United States was still fairly good. Mm-hmm. So the point is, we don't know the intelligence. We don't have the intelligence that can really help us pinpoint and precisely tell what is going on at any given time. The other thing is that the concern now is that we may have miscalculated, as I was alluding to earlier, mm-hmm. what that reaction would be from the North, simply because when we did we still are conducting military exercises there, but then we flew the B-2s. Those two B-2s that flew from the United States to South Korea and back nonstop, and then dropped inert bombs in South Korea rather. It was only about 50 miles south of the North Korean border, and that is what is being regarded as a major provocation that really got the young leader all spun up about that the United States really has intentions of launching a nuclear attack against North Korea.
Now, this young man is just 28 years old.
Correct.
And obviously he was wanting to show his muscle. Mm-hmm. And outdo his predecessor. Mm-hmm. When we come back, I'd like you to address the issue of the response that's coming from Russia and China at this time.
Sure.
Come right back. Our guest today, Michael Meloff, he's a staff writer for WND, but spent years in the Office of the Secretary of Defense. We shall be right back. This is Crosstalk.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, creation author and president of the Institute for Creation Research. Dr. Morris, can a person be an evolutionist and a Christian at the same time?
They certainly can, Chris. Most people, when they come to Christ for salvation, they come as evolutionists. But once a person gets to know the God of the Bible, they quickly see that the concept of evolution is incompatible with the very character of God. How does God's grace and mercy and love compare with survival of the fittest? No, the God of the Bible would create just as it says back in Genesis. He created things in order and in balance, and then created man in His image. That plan of God has been delayed by the introduction of sin and death, but it's not been abandoned. We look forward to the consummation of all things, but it all started back in Genesis.
For more on creation, visit our website at www.icr.org. For the Institute for Creation Research, I'm Chris O'Brien. Thanks for tuning in.
And welcome back to Crosstalk, where today we're talking with Michael Maloof, a staff writer for WND, but a man who has spent years in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, over 30 years of federal service in the U.S. Defense Department, and certainly has a good view of what is happening today. He's talked on this program before about the magnetic pulse, electromagnetic pulse threat in our country, and we talk about its effect on our power grid. Michael, do we have a backup of our power grid that can protect us from this thing?
No. Short answer, no. If and our system is very vulnerable. We've seen this occur when something has broken down. Let's say in Ohio, it can affect the East Coast. Mm-hmm. So I heard one example of a squirrel being fried on a line in Ohio, and that tended to knock out quite a number of areas on the East Coast. So
oh my,
it's really jerry-rigged, and it's not. We have three grids in the United States. We have a Western grid, an Eastern grid, and the Texas grid. And the Eastern grid actually services up to 70% of the U.S. population. And that could easily be a target, and that's what I'm really concerned about. And if that happens, then you're affecting more than half the population at that point with an electromagnetic event, whether it's natural or man-made. I say natural because there's also the prospect of solar flares this year or next year, because the sun's at its most intense period right now.
Well, we suffer that too, even as a satellite broadcaster, because every about 2 or 3 times a year we end up with interference directly from the sun, and those are things that happen. But even some of the most minute things, for instance, we have one radio station that puts out the equivalent of 25,000 watts of power, and here not too long ago a serpent crawled into the building and found its way into the high voltage vault and crawled in, and of course he became charred in a half second.
Sure.
But he took out major components within that and shut the whole radio station down.
Yeah,
whether it's a natural disaster or whether it's something of an electronic mode, which certainly gives us reason to question. I look around at society today. Go to a restaurant and you see half the people sitting there scanning their iPads and iPods and their Blackberries and whatever you call it. When that thing shuts down, panic's going to break loose.
Oh, yeah. It would be rather dramatic, and it would affect our entire way of life as we know it today. Our society is very technology-oriented. Everything we do, including everything we just take for granted, such as traffic lights and automated ATMs, the pumping of our gas, they're all run by automated controlled devices, and that are not governed, that people don't handle at all.
Well, radio and television stations would be put off the air immediately. I mean,
yes,
because we function with solid state devices with a pulse like that could wipe out circuits and whatever. Now let's talk a little bit about Kim Jong-un. This is the North Korean leader. He's a young guy, 28 years old. Anything more you can tell us about him and his arrogance?
Well, he was partially educated in Switzerland. He's been exposed to the West, and the thought was, well, that will probably moderate his thinking and behavior. But other people that I've talked to basically say that's not necessarily so. You had Pol Pot out of Cambodia, who was schooled in Paris. He killed over 1 million of his countrymen in Cambodia. Al-Assad of Syria, he was trained as a medical doctor in London, and he's killed about 60,000 of his people. So it doesn't seem to matter. And of course, Al-Qaeda itself, the leadership, Osama bin Laden, he was a trained engineer from the West. So even though they've had that exposure of the West, it doesn't seem to matter all that much when it comes to their governance and the way that they conduct themselves with people.
Let's look at the relationship of Russia and China to North Korea. What do you know about that?
Well, China and Russia are perplexed, to say the least, with this guy. Whereas with his father, they had a good relationship, and he generally was accommodating to whatever they wanted. Today, it's not the case. He seems to be marching to his own drummer, and that's really frustrating, especially to the Chinese. Both the Russians and the Chinese are counseling all sides to sit down and talk. The Chinese want everybody to return to the six-power discussion that was abandoned by the North Koreans, and I don't know if that's going to happen unless he gets some kind of concession after all of this is said and done, and perhaps that's what he's really angling for, is to gain more leverage so that he can get more out of it, and the general sense is that maybe he's going to be successful in that regard, but it's. The Chinese are frustrated because he doesn't listen to them. And yet they're over the proverbial barrel and between the rock and hard place, simply because they're very concerned about the flow of refugees that would be coming out of North Korea into China. We're talking like millions of people, and that would be a humanitarian disaster if that were to occur. And they've actually mobilized troops along the border to try and prevent that. But also, China has a security agreement with North Korea that if it's attacked, they're going to come to their assistance. Now, my sense is that if there's any kind of provocation and an exchange between North and South, I don't think the Chinese are going to react immediately. They're going to probably still try to get all sides to sit down and talk to one another because they have no stomach for war, unlike in the 1950s.
Yeah.
They have many other things going on, and they have a very heavy reliance, or North Korea has a very heavy reliance on China in feeding its people and providing fuel. And so China has to continue to do that in order to try to maintain some stability on the Korean Peninsula at this point.
Let's look at the situation here in Congress. Congressman Peter King and Senator John Inhofe, who's been a guest on this program, they have stated that the U.S. may need to launch a preemptive strike against North Korea. What are your thoughts?
Well, it depends upon whether we can verify that there isn't actually going to be an imminent threat. North Korea for years has been absolutely how to put this? They've almost perfected the art of deception. And the question is, are these missiles real? Are what they're putting up there actually real? I mean, we've had indications in the past where we had overhead photography look at battlefield tanks and missiles, only to discover that they were actually very well crafted mock-ups. And the question is, are they real or not? And this is where our intelligence people are really going to have to be on the ball. And I'm really concerned that, again, we could have another miscalculation. And I can understand if there was a very strong sense that one of those missiles, especially the longer range missiles, were going to be fired at our assets, particularly in Japan and Hawaii and Guam, that indeed they would go for knocking out that site. But I think it would be just a tit-for-tat type of thing. I don't think it would be a wholesale bombing and carpet bombing of the entire country. I don't think that's going to happen.
Which you would hope. But the question is, how is the U.S. presently preparing to counter that threat? Do you have any idea?
Well, yeah, they have moved assets into the area, anti-ballistic missile sites, facilities, ships rather. If there was to be any activity like that, they probably wouldn't be there to knock out the missiles. But when you're talking preemptive strike, that means you're going to hit them before they're launched. So that means we might be sending missiles into the actual launch facility, and that would absolutely cause everything. That would make this a whole new ballgame.
Well, and then we consider, of course, the similar threat that's happening in Iran. And we got two hot spots in the world, and sometimes very crafty.
Three. We got Syria too.
That's right. And when you see there are people who are well crafted in deception, utilizing a diversion in one place to bring about their attack.
Well, you've raised an interesting point, because I know in the past both North Korea and Iran, who have a very long relationship with one another, they tend to play off events, and in order to divert attention away from the concerns of another country. With Iran, the thought is that Israel is going to go in at almost any time to bomb those facilities. Yet we're trying to be extraordinarily cautious with a country that has we've already established does have nuclear weapons, and yet we're not raising that kind of prospect. And now, certainly during the P5+1 discussions are supposed to be happening again here with respect to Iran's nuclear ambitions, and no one's talking about it today. We're all focused on North Korea. So that diversion has been quite successful, if in fact that was all calculated. And I say they have a long history because Iran actually received much of its missile technology and designs, as well as and a lot of its nuclear know-how from the North Koreans years earlier.
Folks, we have every reason to be cautious and praying for our country as well, for the leaders, that they might have wisdom in dealing with this. Michael, before we go on in our next segment, give us a word about any publishing or books that you have written where people can in depth get this information.
Well, I do article writing almost on a daily basis now, it seems, for WND.com. I'm bylined there, so they can really see it on the main website. Mm-hmm. And, of course, I've now published one book, and that is A Nation Forsaken, and that's my first one. And
that deals with the EMP and the escalating threat to an American catastrophe.
Yes, that's mine, and this whole episode now with North Korea folds beautifully into what we were talking about in that book that came out in January. Mm-hmm. We referenced the prospect of this kind of very thing happening with regard to Iran's missile and nuclear ambitions. And the threat against the United States ultimately, and here they are announcing that they're prepared for a preemptive strike against the United States, and you just this is something that you cannot make up, and it's now happening, even though we talked about it and published it back in January. So. It's something that we have to be very concerned about and take very, very seriously. And I think that the nation itself, and certainly the Congress, has to refocus on how do we protect ourselves and our grid system if in fact there is a miscalculation and missiles start flying. And certainly if he has a nuclear weapon and brings it this way, then we have to be absolutely prepared for such an event, and frankly, we're not. And our Department of Homeland Security is not prepared, and this is during a period where we're witnessing major cutbacks. The states themselves are having to cut back on emergency funds for any kind of mass disasters.
Michael, we're going to take
problems ahead.
Michael, we're going to take a break here for 60 seconds, and we'll be right back. You're listening to a conversation with Michael Maloof, and we'll be right back in 1 minute.
When it comes to the topic of music, often we are quick to provide a defense of the style of music that pleases us, without ever considering what God has said in His Word. Sadly, churches hoping to broaden their appeal are changing their music without regard to the principles laid down in Scripture. To assist individuals, pastors, and music leaders is the book Worship and Music in the Word. In this book, Dr. Dean Kurtz provides a comprehensive study of worship and music from Genesis to Revelation that guides the reader on this important issue. Over 350 pages of study, combined with practical, heartfelt applications from a pastor's heart, are offered, but always with an eye to the final authority, the inspired Word of God. VCY America is making available Worship and Music in the Word. 1 copy for a donation of $20, or 3 copies for a donation of $50. To obtain your copies, call 1-800-729-9829. That's toll free, 1-800-729-9829.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Our guest today, Michael Maloof, a staff writer for WorldNet Daily, or WND.com. I spent years in the Department of Defense, and a man who has watched the ongoing issues that spell security or lack thereof in our country. And he has certainly published that book, A Nation Forsaken, EMP, The Escalating Threat of an American Catastrophe, talking about electromagnetic pulse possibilities simply by exploding a high-level bomb up in the atmosphere, which can literally paralyze our computerized system, and good points to be concerned. Well, now we've got Kim Jong-un from North Korea, who is threatening an attack. We have Congressman Peter King and Jim Inhofe, Senator, who have stated that the U.S. may need to launch a preemptive strike against North Korea. And while this threat's been escalating to its highest level, interesting from CNS News, it's reporting that the President Obama, is on the campaign trail raising money for the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in California today and in Washington tonight. Now, I mean, obviously, if we've got to cancel our tours to the White House, we save a couple of bucks, but you fire up the 747 and probably all that goes out in exhaust. At any rate, here we are with our well, we have to say it like it is. He is our commander-in-chief, and he's on the campaign trail raising money while the world is preparing for an explosion here. Now, we've got a brand-new Secretary of State, John Kerry, and a brand-new Secretary of Defense, Chuck Hagel. Are they equipped to deal with this kind of crisis, Michael?
I think they're going to talk about. Well, John Kerry is known to not favor sanctions, and so he's not going to press for increased sanctions on the North. He's going to try and get everybody to sit down and talk together. And Hagel is the same way. They're both they've both experienced war, and they don't personally, and they don't particularly want to get U.S. engaged in another war. Certainly in the Middle East, that's the case, and as you can see, we're pulling back to the peripheries. People still wondering and scratching their head on what our policy towards Syria is, and yet our pivot now is toward the Far East, and this is where the concentration is going to be, particularly with respect to China, and now with the whole Korean Peninsula situation. So that's going to be riveting for quite some time. I think their approach is more of let's sit down and talk and try to work things out and do more of a diplomatic thing than to have a confrontation and a display of raw military power as we did with the as we've been doing with the exercise. I think that may be toned back.
One more time before we open our phone lines, A Nation Forsaken. How can people get that book?
They can get it either by going to the WND.com website. There's a WND books section, or they can get it on Amazon.com.
Folks, we're going to open the lines. I'm going to press the button right now, which has cleared all of our lines. If you'd like to get on and share with Michael maybe some questions, he's been in the Department of Defense for years. He understands the workings internally as well, and he sees Washington a lot closer than we are, and he knows of the people in which we have spoken today. Maybe you have some questions, maybe some comments to America. We've got people listening all over the United States today, and you may have some comments or admonitions to our fellow taxpayers and fellow countrymen as we face something that looks pretty serious. Our telephone number is 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. And I see the lines already starting to flash here. Number 1 line is on there, and it won't take long before the others light up as well. 800-733-9829. Give us a call, your comments, your questions for our guest, Michael Maloof, and maybe your observation is, by the way, our lines are jammed. And so if you get a busy signal, have your auto dialer ready programmed for 800-733-9829. And we'll pick up that first line. It's just about to be cleared. And, Michael, we certainly appreciate your being available to be with us today.
Well, thank you.
I know that our world of scientific development, a lot of the sci-fi stuff, people almost put tongue-in-cheek, say, that makes good TV drama, makes good TV shows. But in reality, these are real things that can happen. This is not some silly, laser thing or some video game, or this is not a virtual reality. We're talking about a real issue, folks.
Yeah, the Congress back in 2000, a congressionally mandated report of the EMP Commission back in 2008 issued a report that basically underscored just how serious the EMP effect could be on our current grid and on our critical infrastructures. They listed about 8 different critical infrastructures that would all be affected, and these were done by scientists and engineers who know their business, and they basically underscored this prospect and gave a whole series of recommendations to take action, and none of them have been followed.
Waukesha, Wisconsin, and Mike is standing by online. Michael, welcome to the program. You're on with Michael Maloof.
Yes, sir. What if this same situation or scenario had happened with Russia or China? I mean, I think they would have been a little bit more proactive and actually taken out their missile silos instead of kind of going back and forth with these empty words.
Yeah, if I understand the question, is if North Korea was a China or a Russia, is that what you're saying?
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think we'd be even more cautious still because they've got the nuclear weapons, they've got the ability. We know they've got the capability. I think we would. It's a lot of our policy has been our foreign policy has the foundation has been to try and maintain the open channels with those two countries because of who they are, what they are, their size, their capabilities, as well as their influence throughout the world, and certainly we're working with those two countries at every level of political, economic, and military all the time. That isn't the case with North Korea. It's a very isolated country, and as I pointed out earlier, even the Chinese are frustrated with them now. They can't do anything with them. And this is really problematic, and they're really a loose cannon right now this minute, and that's a real problem. At least with Russia and China, you have more of there's more equities involved there. We have much more engagement with them. We have virtually no engagement with North Korea. If we had more leverage with them, that would be one thing, but we have none. We certainly have it with China and with Russia. And for example, China relies very heavily on exports to the United States for its own economic machine. And in turn, we rely on China because they're picking up our debt.
Yeah, right. Who knows what they're cashing in on real estate. Richard in Richland Center, Wisconsin, you're on the air.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Hi, this is Robert.
Robert, I apologize. Robert, go ahead.
I published a book back in the 70s following Bible prophecy, and in there, World War I, World War II, and then it shows Korea and Vietnam, or it started out showing the first one to fall, which was Vietnam to the north. And Korea and Vietnam are put as duplicates of each other. Where I find this in the Bible is following prophetic language in Daniel 11.
Well, I appreciate that, Richard. Thank you very much for sharing that with us as well. Let's go on to Illinois and talk with Zoe. And Zoe, you are on the air with our guest, Michael Maloof.
Hi. My question is, and I don't think he covered this yet, but I had to.
You're talking right. You're talking right to him.
Well, I know.
Okay.
Okay. Sorry, Vic.
That's okay.
I'm wondering about an EMP attack. I've heard some people who've been in the military say it could be done from a ship rather than from the air, and like shoot a missile or whatever from a ship. And I wonder if our country is preparing to prevent that or doing anything to prevent that. And I think that's because I remember when a lot of people think that there was a missile shot off of Los Angeles a few years ago by the Chinese or something.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wonder what he would comment on that.
Yeah, that is a very strong possibility. In fact, what got the Congress to create the EMP Commission was a comment by a Russian parliamentarian to some of our congressmen who basically said, "Look, if we wanted to bring the United States to its knees, all we'd have to do is fire a missile from a submarine off your coast, and we would explode it overhead, and that would take out your grid and your communications." Similarly, we know that countries such as Iran and even North Korea have the capability to launch missiles from the decks of ships. This is a level of technology which that we now know they got. And you could park a ship with a false flag right off the coast at night and just fire that missile right overhead over our megapolis from Boston through Richmond, Virginia, and where we have some of the densest population throughout the United States, and that would have a major impact on the entire country ultimately, but certainly on that area.
Thank you, Zoe. Appreciate that call. Good questions. Harold in Wisconsin. Harold, what part of Wisconsin are you in?
Hello?
Hello, Harold. You're on the air.
Yes, from City of Greenfield.
Greenfield, okay.
Yes. My question is, where can a person go to find out protection from an EMP, not necessarily strike, but the solar flare, for emergency-type generators that quite a few people now have gotten? Is there a source a person can go to get that protection-type stuff? They're
probably a particular type of generators, but you want to make sure they don't have any electronics in them. I think if you Google EMP and protection against EMP and put in generators, I think it'll probably take you to some of what they're recommending. There are a number of outlets now that are pushing for offering containers like Faraday cages and what have you to protect against an EMP and to guard your electronics. For example, if you had a spare radio and batteries and you have a spare phone, you want to stick them all into a Faraday cage before the event rather than because after the event nothing's going to work. So having those, and there is a possibility there might be some emergency radio frequencies that might be working. Mm-hmm. So the U.S. has been working on something like that. The government has. And
the Faraday case is actually a metallic electronic case that literally shades or causes a protective shade around any electronic device, at least so some magnitude of a pulse does not destroy it. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. And it's sealed. It's basically sealed so that no portion of the pulse can get inside. You don't want any wires coming out of it because they can act as antennas.
Okay, we're going to be back in 60 seconds with our last part of the program. And if you have questions, folks, right to the point, because our time is limited. Our guest today, Michael Maloof, and talking about the importance and the pending concerns of what's happening in North Korea. We shall return in a moment. This is Crosstalk.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website's worldviewweekend.com. We're continuing on our series on money and a biblical worldview. 20 points for having a biblical worldview when it comes to money. Number 5, the love of money is the root of all evil. Money isn't the root of all evil. It's the love of money. 1 Timothy 6, verse 10 speaks to this. Money is really neutral, isn't it? You can use $1 to buy a candy bar, or you can use a couple dollars to buy a lottery ticket. It's not evil to buy a candy bar and enjoy that, is it? But the Bible surely speaks to the issue of gambling, ill-gotten gains, coveting that jackpot. So money's neutral. Now, it's the love of money that's the root of all evil. People who love money, we've learned in our last commentary, fall into the temptation to compromise, and they fall into evil things. So let's have a biblical worldview when it comes to money. For more information on having a biblical worldview in all areas of life, our website's worldviewweekend.com. Worldviewweekend.com. For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Vic Eliason, your host today, along with Michael Maloof, our special guest, a man who spent years in the Defense Department, has good background in understanding critical situations that stand on the threshold of nations. And as we're looking at what's happening today, with even a congressman and a senator suggesting a preemptive strike on North Korea because of the possible threat that has been put on the table by the leader, young Kim Jong-un. I've got to say that right. That doesn't come out well for Swedes here. But as we recognize his threats as a young leader, as aggressive and perhaps presumptuous in many ways, thinking that he's more powerful than he really is, the world watches and stands by here with big heart in hand saying what's going to happen next. We're going to open our phone lines if you'd like. We have 2 vacant lines right now. If you have a question or a statement, very quickly to the point, we're going to go to Plymouth, Wisconsin, and talk with Jim. And Jim, you're on with Michael.
Yes, I'm wondering, you think our country is as strong on defense as it used to be? I realize that there's different technology now, but would you say it's as strong as it 20 years ago?
Well, I would suggest that given the new technologies that are out there right now, it's required all new types of thinking and new systems that would have to be put in place. Certainly, any ballistic missile systems are absolutely critical today, and we're unfortunately not up there. We used to have jets that could scramble to on the West Coast. Those are no longer there, except in certain areas, and we don't have that kind of air defense system that we used to have. But we didn't need it. We didn't need what we require today, namely an anti-ballistic missile system that can cover the entire East Coast, West Coast, and the Gulf area, and that's another level of technology altogether. And as it is, Defense Secretary Hagel just ordered another 17 batteries or so of anti-ballistic missiles to the West Coast area, but they're not going to be operational until 2017. That's just how sophisticated all this is, and I just hope that we can get everything in place before there's an event.
And as we're following the rhetoric that's coming out of the news, which you sneeze on one side of the globe and you hear about it a minute later, and of course you hear the threats coming from North Korea and the possibility of there being an action. I mean, it could be history before the sun goes down.
Sure, absolutely. And right now the East Coast is very vulnerable to the very thing that the woman earlier talked about, namely a vessel, a ship with a missile that's shot from that deck. We really don't have a defense against that right now.
And submarines that are missile launching capability are all over out there.
That's correct.
And so we have much not only to be aware of, but pray for our country as well. Now, we have some open lines very quickly. About 3 minutes left, and maybe you didn't get through before. You can call right now, 800-733-9829, 800-733-9829. We'll take your call and get it right here into the studio. If you want to give us a call, it's right there for you. One of the things, as we see these things developing, and the importance of people being aware, prepared, I think of the people in Israel, where practically every home has got a bomb shelter built into it.
Yeah.
We've had folk here from Israel. We talk often with David Rubin directly from Israel. Mm-hmm. And one day I was sitting here talking to a man in Bethlehem, and we think of the song, "O Little Town of Bethlehem, How Still We See Thee Lie." and yet he was describing a helicopter gunship that was busy shooting rockets and missiles. We live in a volatile world, and folks, this is a world where all of the iPads and iPods and tremendous technological devices, and yet we find that the heart of man, when it's wicked, it is destructive, and regardless how fancy the toys are that we have, if people turn their face away from God, our country is in deep trouble. We're standing by here just a moment. We have Jacob in Mount Horeb, Wisconsin. Jacob, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Oh, is that me?
Yes, that's you, Jacob.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I was wondering if your guest could comment on what he thought about how right after Kim Jong-il died, that the U.S. and South Korea engaged in military exercises, and they were simulating the idea of invading North Korea.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is precisely the very thing that the current exercises that are underway are doing, and this is what has in effect become a tripwire to cause this latest round of crisis, and that's why the administration, the Obama administration, according to people I've talked to, are reevaluating the approach that they're taking, rather than showing off all of this military muscle, that they need to tone it down and try not to be provocative about it. It was the B-2s that were flown from the United States to South Korea on a dummy bombing run, which occurred just 50 miles south of North Korea, that really also got Kim Jong-un all spun out of control about that. So, and that prompted him then to announce that the United States indeed had designs of undertaking a nuclear war on North Korea, and that gave him every reason then to mobilize and to do what he's doing now, and to call for preemptive strikes on the United States.
Well, folks, I want to apologize to Rick in Navarre, Florida, and Judy in Waukesha, and Pauline in the state of Oregon, because we only have 30 seconds left. But I want to say, Michael, thank you for being on our program today, and when you see updates on this information, don't hesitate to get back to us, because I think the world is watching.
Okay, well, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Michael. And folks, I want to thank you for joining us on Crosstalk today. Be in prayer for our country. Pray for our nation's leaders, that they might know right from wrong decisions, and that they might have the courage to do what is right and honoring to our Constitution, to our country, and to each and every one that is involved. And remember, God is still our defense. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
Listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Tape Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208, or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for Crosstalk.